Hello everyone and welcome to today's presentation where we talk about project delivery terminology. This is a review of the concepts that we have covered throughout the semester. So let's get started with RFQ. RFQ, or Request for Qualification, is a process in which the firms that are interested in the project, are invited to pinpoint the relative qualifications of the competitors. So it means before uh, anyone who is interested qualifies to submit a bid package, because that would be very difficult for the owner to to study the bid packages that are submitted by a lot of contractors. So this is a tool to narrow down the potential bidders to only those who are qualified based on the project requirements and based on the owner expectations. Okay, so after that, there is a request for proposal. It's a lot more comprehensive than RFQ. So this one is called RFP. Uh, in this process, all the contractors will go ahead and, all the potential contractors will go ahead and submit a bid, submit their bid, which includes all the pricings to very detailed levels, and then the owner will select the winning contractor and will award the contract to them. So responsible uh, constructor, it means it's a constructor that is responsible to perform and complete the work as the contract requires, and their responsibility is to meet the expectations of the owner. Okay, so a responsible constructor should possess the necessary financial and technical capabilities to perform the project according to the contract and according to the owner's expectations. A responsive bid. What is a responsive bid? A responsive bid is a bid that includes all the requirements of the contract without expectations. For example, if there is a big chunk of work that you forget to do the pricing in your bid, you're automatically uh, will be eliminated from the competition. Um, I mean, Regardless of you have provided a very quality bid for other parts, but a non-responsive bid, which is a bid that fails to address some of the key elements or any actually important element of the project in terms of pricing or considering or some of the requirements, some of the conditions that the contract has addressed. If you fail to consider them in your bidding, then your bid is non-responsive and you are out from the from the selection process. So procurement, the other name for procurement, if you remember, was selection. So it is a process of soliciting and soliciting and engaging a designer or a constructor for a project. Okay, so it means you select a contractor or you select a designer for your project. So procurement process is very important because it significantly impacts the type of relationship between project players. Okay, so it could be based on low bid, or it could be based on qualifications only, or QBS, qualification based selection, or it could be a combination of cost and some other qualifications. So the term contracting is good when it's a quick method in which the owner provide some open-ended requirements that would apply to many projects. Okay, so the contractual relationships are set. So instead of starting from the scratch, the owner has a tool that has a lot of information in it, a lot of requirements of the contract have been addressed in it, and the owner could make some minor modifications and prepare the contract for any specific project. So as you can imagine, this is good for where you need to start a project immediately, like an emergency project, or where the project is small, or where you are dealing, as an owner, you're dealing with repetitive projects in different times. Okay, so I mean, your requirements in the contract are pretty much the same. They are repeated, so you actually go with a term contracting that could be just repeated in every project. So substitution is where the constructor recommends different products to the owner, and for example, they would say we could buy this product cheaper, or we could provide it more easily. So they suggest it to the owner, and since the owner is interested in lower cost, most of the time they agree unless there is an issue with them. So I mean, with what the contractor is suggesting. I have to go quick because I have lots of materials to cover. What is bridging? Bridging, if you remember, in design bid delivery method, the owner's control over the design process could be compromised because both design and construction are being performed by the same firm. Okay, so in order to provide some guidelines or a corridor to move in for the designers, the owner would provide a bridging document. It includes partial design information, and the owner will actually use it as a basis of pricing. Okay, so it's very, it's an initial document. Obviously, it does not provide a lot of information about the design, and it could be prepared by the owner in-house, or for more complicated projects, the owner may even hire a consultant to prepare a bridging document and then deliver them to the design builder. So bridging architect or bridging designer is the person who helps the owner in providing the bridging document. Okay, so they assist the owner in developing the bridging document. Yes, they put specific design elements and they monitor the actual construction of the project to ensure that it is consistent with the requirements of the program and what the owner needs. Okay, so owners owner's program is, so what is owner's program? It's a statement of the requirement for the project. So it's another way to to maintain or to make sure that the project are aligned with what the owner needs. So these things, the bridging and the owner's program are both some means to kind of limit the designers to follow specific guidelines, with the intention of ensuring owners' expectations are met. So what is the drawback of them? There are some advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, the advantage is that the owner is now more certain that at least their expectations are clearly defined for the designers. But on the downside, the bad thing about them is that the creativity, that the flexibility and the creativity of the designers in design build delivery method, because is compromised. Why? Because in design build, most of the time the design and construction team are, since they are under the umbrella of the same company, they are tightly matched with one another. I mean, the designers have full knowledge and understanding of the resources available and how they should design in a way the construction can progress smoothly. So when the owner wants to limit the design by providing specific guidelines that need to be followed, the designer's power in matching the design with the resources on the field is lowered, is reduced. So that is the drawback or downside of bridging documents. So consensus documents, what are they? I have a nice video which explains them in 2 minutes. So let's take a look. Oops, I need to turn on my volume. Sorry about that.
X is the only activity on this path. It's 10 days of in duration. So this path...
Okay, so consensus documents once again. Let's go.
One loophole left unaddressed can be all it takes to sink a company. Negotiating the right terms of a contract for your project can sometimes feel like you're going into battle, and one-sided contracts are a recipe for disaster. What if finding a suitable construction contract for your unique project didn't have to be so hard? That's why the Consensus Docs Coalition was founded. We do so much more than help you find the right standardized contract. We're changing the way people think about contracts. All the organizations of the Consensus Docs Coalition are committed to ensuring that its documents serve the best interests of everyone involved, so you can build on a strong foundation of trust. Representatives from all parts of the industry, especially designers, contractors, subcontractors, owners, and lawyers, come together to form the Contract Content Advisory Council to ensure that your contracts are updated to meet changes in the law or current industry practices, or discuss new documents addressing emerging trends. After a working group has a contract document, it's reviewed by all the organization's representatives in the Consensus Docs Coalition, giving them one final chance to speak up. Everyone's voice has a place in our process. With a catalog of more than 100 industry-tested contracts, you have a lot to choose from to address your needs. And if you need to make edits, documents can be easily modified to suit your project. Consensus Docs is here to serve your needs as a versatile business solution and one-stop shop for all your contract needs. Consensus Docs, building a better way.
Yeah, so yes, they are a company who provide contracting, consulting services, but besides that, they sell some packages that are pre-made contracts, and those contracts have been, very carefully set up to fulfill the expectations of are all the main project players, okay, being the owner, the constructor, and the designer. Okay, so in these contracts, many things, actually it's a platform of having a lot of information that is ready to go, so you can just you can just make some minor modifications on this template to suit that document for your own project. So as you can imagine, it is fast and it is specifically good for inexperienced owners because it has been set up with a lot of studies, and it has tried to incorporate better practices and fair risk allocation for everyone on the project. All right, conceptualization is the process in IPD, Integrated Project Delivery process, in which all the teams sit down together and they develop project goals and the desired outcomes of the project in a way, what outcomes should be achieved so the project could be called a successful project. So this is conceptualization of the project that obviously happens upfront, very beginning in the project. Constructability review is where, again, the main project players sit down together and they coordinate. They evaluate the coordinations, the schedule, the technical obstacles, which could be existing in the design, and then they identify project constraints. Okay, the benefit of that is that, again, they do it early in the project. The benefit of that is that the adjustments could be easily and most economically made before people go to the field and face issues. It means they review the project, the main elements of the project from the start, from A to Z, from start to end, and then they try to figure out what are some of the possible issues that we may encounter, and then accordingly they make modifications in the project, or they come up with solutions before the problem urges. So outline specification, it is a brief document to define the pricing. Obviously, it is prepared when the design is not 100% ready. So it's a simple specifications that defines the basis of pricing. Okay. So it's more based on a system analysis approach. Okay. So it's not based on final project specifications because they are not ready yet. But for example, you would identify the main elements of the project, what should be designed, and some pricing for each of them. For example, we don't want this unit of this part of the project to cost more than this amount. So it kind of provides some guidelines for the designers to set their design or develop their design in a way that the pricing of the different elements of the project could be met. And obviously this would help the project to finish within budget. If you don't have an outline for specifications, you might do a very expensive design in one part. It would be very expensive to build, and then for the next parts you might need to compromise on some elements of the design to just make it cheaper to compensate for the expensive price of the previous parts. So you don't want this to happen. That's why you identify different parts of the design and the capacity of the cap budget for each of them, and then the designers will do the design accordingly. So the performance specifications, similarly to design specifications, these documents, they define the performance requirements of the completed system. Means when the system is complete, it is expected to 1, 2, 3. So they are a tool to make sure owners' expectations are satisfied, and the constructor, it means the builder. So actually, outline specification is a tool for designers. Performance specification is a tool mainly for constructors or contractors, okay? Because it tells them what should be achieved by this project, okay? What are some of the expected outcomes of this project? And then they make sure to fulfill it throughout the construction time. All right, so here we have a bunch of concepts. Let's start with partnering. Partnering is a collaborative process in which all the team players will sit down together and they define the common goals and problems of the project. So this is similar to conceptualizing, but what it means in partnering, the rewards and the risks are discussed collaboratively. The concerns of different project players are discussed, and all the team try together to find solutions for each problem. Okay, for example, one major construct one major subcontractor would, can say, we can't do this part of the project at this time of the year or with these specifications. But if you make this modification, we could do our job a lot more easily. So what happens is that the other team players discuss it and try to accommodate different concerns. Obviously, the result is when the project starts, many concerns have been met, and now the project can go smoothly because the problems have been seen before they occur. So, collaboration. What is collaboration? It's a form of partnering. It's based on solving the problems together. So, actually, partnering should start upfront. And it continues when the project is in progress. Most of the time we refer to that concept as collaboration. It means communication should be an ongoing process. All the team should make efforts to ensure that the common goals of the project are achieved. Okay, so public-private partnership is the time when a public agency is in a contractual agreement with a private sector, with a private company, and they share the skills, the resources they have together to make the project. For example, a company might have a public agency might have a good number of construction equipment. Okay, so they ask the contractor that we want to make the project cheaper for us, so we are going to use our own resources. Or for example, we want to have these people to be hired by you in this project. So it's based on a mutual agreement, and in which the public agency, who is in fact the client or the owner of the project, will provide some resources to the constructor, who is a private agency. So privatization is when all of the project responsibilities, including financing, development, operations, all of them, construction, design, all of them are inclusively or are actually given exclusively to a contractor. Okay, so they do everything, including operation and maintenance services for a project. So it's like telling someone that it's all yours from the very beginning to operation and maintenance. So everything about the project will be given to one firm, and they have to take care of everything about it. One example of privatization is for industrial projects, where you have a lot of equipment, and there is a lot of complication if you don't want different parties to be involved in that, because the first outcome is that they would switch the blame, they would shift the blame to one another. But privatization, the good thing is that the responsible party is always one firm, and you can easily control the progress of the project, and as well as the functioning of your facility. So open book contracting is where all the contractual requirements are shared openly. So there is nothing should be hidden from the project players. Specifically, it provides a very transparent sharing of cost information between different project players. So everyone will have access to them, the invoices, the estimates, the bids, all of those information, that information is available for everyone on the project. So there are good things and bad things about it. There are, pros and cons. Most of the time, it's advantages. advantageous for the project, but sometimes, it could create additional negotiations between the team players because they should be content. Everyone should be satisfied with the pricings that are happening in the project. So, what is risk shifting? Shifting of risk from the owner to the contractor. Okay, this is most of the time, the owner or the contractor are trying to put less risk on themselves and more risk to the other parties. So that's the atmosphere of many construction projects. And if you remember, IPD is an exception in which all the team players work for the common interest of the project. Okay, so shared risk or reward is where all the team, like what I just said, like in IPD, all the team work together to mitigate the risk. For example, to meet the target price. Target price promotes or encourages sharing the risk. If you remember, target price is the only reimbursement method in which the designers are also involved in the risks of the project. It means once they are done with the design, they're not out. They should be involved in the entire risks, and also the rewards are similarly shared between players. For example, if there are some savings at the end of the project, then they could share it between themselves. This is based on the initial contract or agreement that everybody has signed. I mean, how the savings should be shared or distributed between players should be decided upfront in the contract. Yep, savings are kind of rewards. Sometimes you could finish the project with a price that is lower than you have agreed or you have signed. Like I said, in many projects, many IPD projects, or in projects that implement lean construction philosophy, there could be some savings at the end of the day because there is a lot of improved collaboration between team players, mitigated risks, and increased productivity. So the project most of the time can finish earlier than what you have estimated. So you could be able to save some money, and based on the agreement, you would share it between project players. So you remember consensus document? It's a form of standard it's a form of standard documents or standard contracts. Okay, so many of the times owners, designers, or constructors, instead of starting from scratch, they have some standard forms to hire lower tiers. For example, an owner would hire a contractor, or a contractor would hire a subcontractor. They have some custom forms that are modeled based on the expectations of their firm, the obligations they want to address in their documents. So they put that together, and then it increases the precision of the contract because these forms have been shaped throughout the years based on previous experiences. So they reflect the negative experiences they have had before, and it protects them against repetition of such experiences. And it also helps them not to forget or not to fail to address some critical points. So teaming agreement. Teaming agreement is in the heart of partnership, okay, or partnering, where all of the firms, agree to jointly pursue the opportunity as an individual project. It means if there is a chance for saving, if there is a chance to do something more easily, okay, or actually reduce the project costs or increase its speed, you would offer it to the project players, even if that would make your own job more difficult. But you care about the interest, the common interest for the project, the common interest of the project. That's why you would select those methods. So let's talk about some of financial terms. Project contingency is, is generally held by the owner to have set some money aside. So in case the major problems or scope changes that are costly happen, they have some additional money, okay, to rely on and to use it for such occasions. Progress payments are, the lump sum money that is agreed in a contract is not given at once, but it is given in periodic payments to make the contractor motivated to finish the project. Because if you give the whole money at the upfront, so the contractor is already paid, so it might negatively impact their performance. And obviously, you cannot pay everything at the end because the contractor has a lot of expenses. So they should be reimbursed periodically. That is called progress payments. They usually have a certain date in the month. That does not necessarily have to be the first day of the month. It could be any day of the month. But most of the time, they happen monthly, and they are repeated. So retainage, I'm sure you remember that, or retention is another name for that, is the amount of money that the owner withholds from the reimbursements that should be given to the contractor. The idea is to keep the contractor motivated to finish the project, okay? The percentage of retainage varies anywhere between 5 to 15%, depending on the trust that exists between the owner and the contractor. Obviously, the more is the trust, the less money you have to withhold as an owner from what you need to give to the contractor. Okay, so debt financing, it's a short-term financing. Okay, that pays the cost of planning, designing, and constructing a project. So it's actually a form of loan. It's a construction loan, and the lender will typically disburse the funder in increments. Okay, that is tied to project expenses. It means they give the loan to you periodically and that comes in incremental portions. So the constructor will have sufficient funds to progress the project towards its completion. Workers' compensation, yeah. So every state, has workers' compensation that require. So based on the workers' compensation, the employer are required to obtain and maintain insurance against injury to their employees. Okay, and construction industry being one of the most hazardous industries is a big, it's very important to have workers' compensation here. So you provide that coverage, that insurance coverage for your employees, and in return, your employees are barred from suing the employer in the event an injury happens to them. Okay, so you give something and you spend something and you gain something here as the owner or as the employer. Yeah. So let's have a quick review on the insurances that we have discussed. The general liability insurance is the most common form of insurance, which is carried by constructor. It could be also called comprehensive general liability, or CGL. So remember, CGL is general liability insurance. Owner's liability insurance, it's similar to CGL, but it applies to claims arising from the actions of the owner. Most of the time, when something bad happens to outsiders of the project, for example, a passenger who has got injured because something that related to the project, so that passenger, pedestrian, not passenger, that pedestrian would sue the owner and the contractor. Okay, so they would sue everybody. If they go to the lawyer say just sue them all, and then the liability that the owner will use should be different from the liability that the contractor uses. So it means the owner could also be identified as responsible because of the injury that has happened. So the owner has to rely on some kind of insurance to protect themselves in such occasions. That's why they go for owner's liability insurance. Project insurance, it's a multifaceted policy that covers the interests of the many parties that are working in the project. Okay, so it actually insures the project, not specific parties. Okay, self-insurance. It is self-insurance retention or deductible. Is the amount of the deductible in advance of any obligation of the part of insurance company to cover a loss. Okay, it means you set some money aside for the deductible part of the insurance, and we call this self-insurance. So umbrella liability insurance provides excess coverage. For example, if the cap of insurance for a specific event is $1 million, and then the loss exceeds $1 million, then the umbrella liability insurance steps in, and then it covers any additional charges that exceed the previous insurance, whatever it is, cap. Okay, the cap of the previous insurance. Automobile coverage by constructor is it covers against any claims involving the use of vehicles by the constructor's employees. Okay, so if they have an accident, the insurance company will step up and cover those expenses. Professional liability, it's for malpractice insurance against claims. That's very important for infrastructure projects, because if you do a mistake, if you make a mistake, even unintentionally, of course it is unintentionally, you have to pay millions or sometimes billions of dollars. So you want to, protect yourself against those liabilities. That's why you, as an engineer or a designer or an architect, would buy a professional liability insurance. And also the constructor could buy them. Usually come in play after the construction is ready to use, is open to public, or it is functioning, and then something happens, and then they identify this is due to the negligence of the contractor, the designer, or anybody on the project. So they have to protect themselves. So we already talked about this one. This is a review. Owner-controlled insurance program, or OCIP, is the only critical distinction between an OCIP and the difference between the CCIP, which is constructor-controlled insurance, okay, and owner-controlled insurance is that both of them are comprehensive insurance programs that cover a lot of risks to the project, okay, for the benefit of all companies and persons that are involved in a project, okay. So the difference between the two of them, in the first one, in OCIP, the owner is the person who procures and holds the insurance, and in constructor-controlled insurance, or CCIP, this is the constructor who controls and procures, who holds and procures the insurance, okay? So it's a comprehensive coverage against many of the incidents that could happen throughout the project. So lien waivers, if you remember, it's a relinquishment, means you waive your right to the extent of the amount that has been paid and a record of the flow of funds, okay? It means you cannot claim that you have not been reimbursed for the money, okay? So you cannot, when you sign that, you cannot place a lien on the contract, and that could be between a subcontractor and a contractor, that could be between a contractor and the owner. So I have 3 nice videos here. You can watch them later, and if you can't click on it, you can simply Google these titles: what is a lien waiver in construction, the 4 types of liens, and and 3 lien waiver mistakes you need to avoid. Okay. So dispute resolution alternatives. Let me check the time. Don't want to exceed. Yeah, it's been 42 minutes so far. Okay. And I'm in the last slide, so that's perfect timing. Dispute resolution alternatives are, the most, instead of going to the court, there are some ways that you could resolve a dispute. Obviously, it starts with negotiation. It means you sit down together and try to solve it internally or in-house. If it didn't work, then you would go up to mediation. It means you invite a person, and then that person should not be biased, should be impartial, and then that person will decide. But the decision he or she makes is not legally binding. It's just a suggestion. And if it didn't work, you could go with arbitration, in which an expert would be invited who studies all the project documents and then decides who is at fault, or how the fault should be distributed between the parties who are involved in this, dispute. If it didn't work, you could go, before I explain about that. So arbitration could be legally binding. It depends on how you decide, but since it's an expensive it's an expensive resolution method, because you need to pay a firm a lot of money most of the time, because they will do a thorough investigation of all your expenses and the project, incidents, to find out why the problem has, risen. Then, you have put a lot of effort, time, and expenses into that. So most of the time, you want it to be legally binding. But anyway, if it also didn't work, then the highest level would be going to the court. We call it litigation. So a judge will decide for you. Obviously, it's legally binding, and you have to follow that. Many people believe that the precision in arbitration is a lot better than litigation, because in arbitration, an expert is hired who is great at projects that are similar to the project that has caused some disputes between the parties. For example, you would invite a senior engineer or senior project manager who has a lot of experiences in that type of the project. So compare it with court, in which a judge who knows a lot of different things but not very deeply has to make a decision for you. So I almost explained all of them. Yeah, what is mini trial? The mini trial is a non-binding presentation of each side's case to a jury or panel of 3 people. Okay, so in fact, they sit down together and they present the case or a panel of 3 people. So most of the time, it creates a chance that they could figure out, some resolution policy for that. But again, it's not binding. It means you are not legally responsible to follow the decision that is made by those panel, or most of the time 3 people. So what is on-call? It's an accelerated procurement approach that is generally used to describe open-ended contractual relationships. Okay, it means contractual relationships are very flexible. They could change or modify throughout the project duration based on the different things that happen. Obviously, again, they're good for small projects or emergency projects because you don't have to put a lot of time and effort into setting up the contract. Okay. All right. So that completes the project delivery terminology, and I hope you have learned these terms. These are very useful terms, very fundamental. I strongly advise you to get yourself familiar with these concepts. Thank you for your attention.